Hello, this is Michael Swain, Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa, known as 4SA, with my colleague Daniela Ellerbeck, our in-house legal advisor. And we're here to give you an update on two of the key religious freedom issues that we've been dealing with this week in Parliament and with government as we work consistently to protect our rights to religious freedom. And we're going to start with the anti-money laundering bill. This is one of two bills that is currently before Parliament as they work through the ways of preventing terrorism from being obviously assisted and, in this instance, in the anti-money laundering bill, financed through this country. So, Daniela, we did have concerns about this, and we expressed those concerns, and there has been a subsequent meeting. So tell us, what are the latest developments in Parliament in this anti-money laundering bill?
So, Michael, National Treasury met with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee tasked with working on this bill, the Standing Committee on Finance, last week. 4SA attended this meeting. And listeners and viewers might remember that the bill, when it was tabled in Parliament, suggested that every single voluntary association, every single non-profit company, and every single trust that exists for a public benefit or purpose essentially would have to register as a non-profit organization with the Department of Social Development, the DSD. And as a result of the public outcry, because this would be impossible, literally it would mean that your knitting club down the road would have to register as an NPO, with the DSD, who can't even pay social grants effectively. Treasury said, okay, maybe not every single non-profit organization, but only the at-risk ones. Only the at-risk ones will need to register as an NPO with the DSD. And Treasury proposed during last week's meeting with Parliament that an at-risk organization should be organizations that provide, send money overseas or provide services overseas. So, for example, this would still include numerous religious organizations who, for example, churches that support missionaries overseas or have international ministry partners and send money overseas. All of these would have to register as NPOs with the DSD. However, one other recommendation that National Treasury gave Parliament is that the criminal sanctions in the bill, because not only does the bill propose mandatory registration, it also proposes criminal sanctions for failing to register, is that the criminal sanctions be dropped in the bill. And as a result of the concerns raised by 4SA about the doctrine of entanglement, which is where the state is prevented from getting involved in doctrinal issues, because the DSD, when an organization applies to be registered as an NPO, has the ability to say, look, we want you to make the following changes about membership and leadership in your founding documents. The National Treasury said that okay, that it needs to be worked on, that the DSD can't interfere with NPOs, constitutions, and other founding documents. Next steps are that the Standing Committee on Finance, again, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee tasked with working on the bill, is set to meet on the bill tonight at 6 p.m., being the night of the 1st of November, 2022, and they will commence with clause-by-clause deliberations on the bill. Michael,
Good.
4SA...
So that's good news.
That is good news. It is going to impose an additional administrative burden on churches, but at least with the lifting of, or the proposed lifting of criminal sanctions and the proposed prevention of the state interfering with your doctrine, it's much better than what it was. And people might recall that it still needs to go to the second House of Parliament. 4SA will keep a close eye on this bill as it progresses, and we will keep the public up to date and informed when there is another chance for public participation. Michael, so this brings me to 4SA's meeting last week with the Department of Basic Education, the DBE. Now, 4SA was invited to discuss the department's draft guidelines on sexual orientation and gender identity, commonly known as SOGI. Now, what was this meeting about, and what was discussed about the draft SOGI guidelines?
Well, we've been involved in this from quite a while back when similar guidelines were being developed within the Department of Education in the Western Cape. And this whole process was shifted to the Department of Basic Education at a national level. And they have a unit within the Department of Basic Education called the Social Cohesion and Equity in Education Unit. And they've been developing these guidelines, also advised by another group of, we don't know whether they're volunteers or not, but they're called the Social Inclusion in Education Working Group. And most of them, various stakeholders, come from the transgender community. And the purpose is, and I quote, to address the human rights and needs of gender and sexual minorities in education. So this group has effectively assisted in drafting a guideline, a document, which, as you said, is called the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression and Sex Characteristic Guidelines, specifically for public schools. And their desire, if not their intention, is that they will roll this out through provincial departments of education sometime in March next year to coincide with Human Rights Month. So this is obviously concerning for various reasons. Daniela, we were, I think, very clear. You led the presentation and expressing some of these concerns. So maybe you could just take us through what we highlighted to the department during our conversation.
So, Michael, I think it's perhaps important to state from the get-go that 4SA was very clear and unequivocal in our presentation interactions with the department that there is no place for bullying, harassment, or intimidation in schools, and that every single person has the right to a basic education, and that public schools need to accommodate absolutely everyone. And they can't unfairly discriminate against someone based on, for example, their sexual orientation or their gender. Now, 4SA's main concerns with the guidelines, and these are still draft guidelines, and we are grateful that the department met with us and listened to our concerns, is that government needs to be ideologically neutral. So we went through the example of the OGOD case as an illustration of how various rights can be accommodated in the public realm and how schools need to be ideologically neutral places. In the sense that public school in and of itself, in the OGOD case, for example, could not align itself with a specific religious belief or ethos. And in the same way, government in its guidelines and policies needs to be ideologically neutral. The state can't impose a specific ideology or ideological viewpoint on learners, because again, that would affect the learners and their parents' right to religious freedom and freedom of expression, as well as many other fundamental rights. Because as we've mentioned before, religious freedom found in Section 15 of the Constitution entrenches and protects not only the right to choose the religion you want to believe in and to live out that belief publicly without fear of persecution or prosecution, but it also protects your freedom of thought, your freedom of opinion, your freedom of conscience, and your freedom of belief. So it's a very, very wide and very fundamental, right at the basis, constitutional right. So the state must respect all of these constitutional rights. And they can't favor one right over another. And we also discussed how the Constitutional Court has repeatedly said that there is no hierarchy of rights in our Constitution. One right does not trump another right, and one right is not more important than another right. And the state, in terms of the Constitution, and it says it right there in the beginning of the Bill of Rights, is tasked with protecting and promoting every single right in the Constitution. We also raised concerns that in the international context, the impact of similar guidelines has caused concerns to be raised about things such as shared bathrooms, changing rooms, accommodation. I mean, the guidelines in the current draft form also make provision for biological males to compete in non-contact female sport. And yes, there was also one of the things we raised with the department is the concern of forced speech, because everyone has the right to freedom of expression. And as our courts have said, no one in South Africa has the right not to be offended. So when things like preferred pronouns and date naming become ideological stances that get adopted in guidelines, and again, guidelines are different to policies. Policies are mandatory, guidelines are mere recommendations. 4SA is very happy with the fact that this is just a guideline. One needs to look at, like, are we justifiably and reasonably limiting the right to freedom of expression. Because remember, every time a fundamental right gets limited, the state needs to meet the Section 36 test. So basically, we went through all of this with the department and again said what the department needs to do is make sure that it doesn't adopt a specific ideological position, make sure that it creates an environment where every single learner is not discriminated against unfairly in a public school context, is not intimidated, harassed, or bullied, and where every single learner is able to live out their constitutional rights, their freedom of thought, beliefs, opinions, their freedom of expression, their freedom of association, privacy, all of those things. So it was.
I think we were certainly, I think, happy that the Department of Basic Education, or this unit, was very open to the input. I know that for some who were on the call, perhaps what we were saying slightly cut across what they believe themselves, but I think that there was definitely an openness to really an objective application of South African law and how it effectively was a lens through which we have to look at these guidelines, because obviously they must be compliant with South African law.
Exactly. And given the potential impact that these guidelines will have, one of the important things that arose out of our conversation with the DBE, and perhaps Michael, you can address this, is whether or not there will be a public participation process.
Yeah, and I think the good news is that, yes, there will. Although, interestingly enough, as you said, these are guidelines, not policy. And policies require public participation process. Guidelines typically do not. And there has, I think, been perhaps a reticence up to this point to actually bring these guidelines out into the, let's say, the light of public scrutiny. But we did, as part of the conversation, gain an assurance from the Department of Basic Education that they would indeed publish them and that they will open them up for public comment. And the proposed period for that will be until the 31st of December 2022. So that is good news. At the time that we're speaking, we haven't had any official confirmation of that or who the relevant contact person within the department would be. And we are obviously, now we have a copy of these guidelines. We, for SA, are in the process of scrutinizing them, and we will be advising, probably in the form of another video like this, of what our concerns are, and then also helping people to understand, and we intend to work with Dear SA again, how to engage in the public participation process. So this is coming up. It's obviously a very big issue. Let's be honest and state that it has at least the potential of impacting all public schools in South Africa, and it may well spread into the private schooling as well. So we're talking about literally millions of children potentially being affected and impacted by these guidelines. So let's be ready to engage when the opportunity arises.
And I think, again, it's that thing of everyone's constitutional rights being respected and protected, and making sure that schools are safe spaces for everyone. So, Michael, where can people go to learn more about these matters and to keep track of future developments when it comes to religious freedom issues?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. We always say to people, keep up to date. It's so important that we understand the times that we're in, and these are often very fast-moving issues. So go to the forsa.org.za website. You can follow us at our Freedom of Religion SA Facebook page, and increasingly we have our 4SA Freedom of Religion YouTube channel that we're starting to put a lot more stuff on. So go there, sign up for our newsletter, and please remember, donate to 4SA. Make a donation now while it's in front of you, because we are only able to do what we do because of the voluntary financial contributions we receive. So please partner with us in this fight for faith and freedom. Until the next time, have a great day further.
Good day. This is Daniela Ellerbeck, the legal advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa. Remember to like and share this video, and then click on the subscribe button to make sure you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.